All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Nico, thank you for joining as well. This is
Yeah,
the
man.
next
Excited to be here.
episode. Yeah, appreciate it, man. This is the next episode of AI in Sales Founder Series. We'll be talking about a whole bunch of fun stuff related to what we're observing in sales and go-to-market, particularly what we're observing with applying AI for sales and go-to-market teams. I'm super excited to pick the brain of Nico here, and then we'll also touch on a number of predictions for 2025 for sales, go-to-market, and AI in general. And so, for those who are joining for the first time, welcome. I'm Dustin Beaudoin, founder of ChatAE. We are a platform for helping enterprise sellers do deep account and prospect research. And with me is Nico, founder of Default. Nico, thank you so much for joining, man. Really appreciate this, and I'll kick it over to you for another for a deeper intro on your side. But super excited to chat today, man.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me, man. Yeah, like Dustin mentioned, I'm Nico. I'm one of the two co-founders at Default. We're essentially a modern revenue orchestration platform. So starting kind of like with the lead routing, lead qualification, sales, and marketing handoff process, and working our way down to build kind of the super orchestration layer for the modern go-to-market stack. So very excited to be here today and nerd out on go-to-market and AI. Two things that are very near and dear to me.
I bet, yeah. Cool, man. Well, like I always like to kick this off by diving into a little bit of the product you're focused on, the product area that you're focused on. And I'm curious how one thing I ask founders all the time is how are you thinking about what is like the smart way for Default to be applying and weaving AI into your product versus the problems that you're tackling and where AI, maybe not might not be as necessary. Like, how do you think about balancing where it's core versus where it's like a nice to have in your product?
Yeah, totally. I think there are a few kind of fundamental truths I think about how people use AI and where AI is best right at this kind of point in time, as well as some of the trends and tailwinds I think we're seeing generally in the good market space. A couple that we're paying very close attention to, there's like kind of three that we're really paying attention to going into 2025. The first one was really the commoditization of third-party data. So I think we've seen this a lot over the course of probably the last like 12 to 18 months, as we've seen a lot of folks kind of come to market with these like broader, like signal-based selling or like, signal orchestration platforms, and as well as the rise of platforms like Play, right? That are essentially, these kind of data marketplaces, right? Where you can kind of come in and you can sort of buy data, and they've made use of these really sophisticated and very interesting kind of hybrid kind of partner and seller networks to resell that data. But I think that's driving a ton of commoditization of the underlying stuff, right? Which is just data that all these vendors in the background are kind of buying and reselling from one another, right? Like Clearbit, buying from People Data Labs, ZoomInfo buying from People Data Labs, everybody kind of buying from one another. It's a very incestuous kind of marketplace in the back end, and now that's kind of exposed to the end user, the customer. So that's something that we're really betting is going to continue going into 2025. We're like, we actually think that the cost might not change that much is in this like database based enrichment approach, which is kind of like the traditional like Clearbit kind of People Data Labs approach, where you're essentially like pinging an API that fetches data from a database and sort of like returns something to an application. I think that stuff is super useful for a lot of the use cases that we have at Default, like real time routing. You're basically being able to pull in enrichment so you can route in real time, where like speed of that operation matters a ton. But then, like, I think we're going to start to see a bit of a bifurcation as well, where you'll see a lot more like native enrichment that is probably like LLM and like web crawler based, just because now it's so easy. You can spin something up with like browser based or like Crew AI to go and like just take all this data out of like web pages and push it into a database, right? So I think that's going to be really interesting. But we're going to start to see a lot more enrichment data in a ton of different go-to-market platforms. The second thing that we're paying a lot of attention to, and that I think we've done a very good job of kind of like leading the charge on early on, is this trend of data vendors being sort of forced to build for or build in a way that's very friendly with orchestration products. To my earlier point, like headless browsers, agents, etc. Agents, which is really right now is just like kind of like LLMs and something like a Crew AI or a browser base. They're enabling you to kind of asynchronously collect and aggregate tons of data points at the account level, some at the person level as well, a little less reliably. It's driving a lot of this cost of enrichment down, right? And I think we're starting to see this a lot natively with platforms that have both the data and the workflow, that orchestration. Like Clay is a great example of this. Default as well as another example of this. But I think we're going to keep seeing this a lot over various products in the next year. For a lot of the legacy vendors, like we're already starting to see it with like Clearbit investing very heavily in the relationship with Zapier and vice versa. We'll see how that plays out post HubSpot acquisition, but that's another thing we're very interested in taking a look at and continuing to build for. And the third thing is a lot of like very native kind of AI copilot and kind of bundled agent offerings coming into play. I already started to see this as well with platforms like Warmly and Unify, but that's a lot that we're looking at. So to your question, the underlying themes, I think, for like go-to-market vendors, right? Where you want to be is you want to be in a place where you can very easily collect a ton of data, right? AI is best when you have a ton of information. It's very context rich, especially for sales and marketing use cases, right? If you're, outbounding to an account with some like AI SDR, and the AI SDR doesn't know if this is already an account in the CRM with an open opportunity, right? You're going to end up with some pretty pissed off prospects, right? So you kind of want to be building in these areas where you get a lot of data, and this usually happens at these like points of entry or points of ingestion in the go-to-market stack. For us, that's like the inbound lead funnel. And I think you have to invest really heavily in integrations, right? Pretty sophisticated integrations as well. I think those are like the two big takeaways there on building for these things. I think in terms of where we have seen a lot of our customers use AI in and outside of default is not actually in the sales workflow. I think the sales workflow, it's very, very hard to sort of disrupt the seller's workflow. And I think for a lot of vendors, like they've always, it's a sort of like dream state, I think for a lot of go-to-market SaaS vendors has been like, let's find a way to work into like the seller's workflow. And I think the best interface for a seller, I think in the go-to-market stack that has to do with AI is like a chat-based interface. I'm a big believer in that. I think where you can create a ton of leverage is actually in like the back office operations, like RevOps. Clay is great for this as well. But data, if you sort of want to run like an AI first go-to-market motion, or you want to adopt, AI first workflows or strategies, you need to have really good data, and AI is great for that.
Yeah, no, a lot of good stuff there. One of the things you mentioned is like, and we're seeing this directly with what we're doing with ChatAE. We're helping enterprise sellers do better account and prospect research for meeting prep and for breaking into their like largest, most strategic of accounts. And the thing there is like, we'll have conversations with sales leaders, and the thing we hear over and over is like, hey, like, we don't want our sellers in another tool. Like, we don't want to disrupt that workflow that they already have. In many cases, like sales leaders, that's one of the things they're most weary about when it comes to another tool, right? And so fitting in natively into an existing workflow, whether it is being more of that like engine layer, pushing things to the seller via Slack or via the inbox or wherever you're plugging into, I think is definitely something we're going to see more and more more and more sales tech like tools take the approach of, kind of like what honestly like Champify has done on like the Champify, the user gems of the world, like feeding those highly contextual rich signals into where you're already working, rather than forcing you to get into there the way you do with other tools. And so that plus back office stuff, I do think like is going to be ripe for disruption.
Totally.
As you're having conversations with like RevOps teams, for example, how much of what they're focused on right now is like handling some of these more traditional back office, like RevOpsy types things, versus how much are these RevOps teams actually thinking about like enabling their sellers with better tooling and taking advantage of AI? Like, are they still mostly focused on like the core back office stuff that you're seeing, or how much are they thinking about enabling their sellers with AI to make them more efficient, more productive?
Yeah, I think the day-to-day for a lot of RevOps teams probably hasn't changed much in the last 2 years. There, I think, probably has been a lot of focus around consolidation and kind of hairier, more technical problems there. I don't think we have not seen. It's really funny. I think there's like something we joke about internally is how like if you were to kind of like look at a LinkedIn feed on in our corner of like LinkedIn, right, like the go-to-market SaaS corner of LinkedIn, you'd probably walk away thinking AI is disrupting everything for everyone. And the interesting bifurcation is like what the market is rewarding demand wise, right? There's a ton of demand for like these three core things in this category of software, and it's just AI, data, and workflows, right? And if you have all three of those, you have a ton of demand, right? Like we see this right now with like 11x, with Clay, with Artisan, with Unify, Warmly, a bunch of vendors that have been very early to have those three core pillars to their offerings. And I think what's been really interesting for us is that as we've been talking to a lot of prospects and a lot of customers, the day-to-day like hasn't really changed that much. And apart from vendors that have kind of popped up in the last like 18 months or so, existing legacy vendors are working on ways to embed AI into their existing customers' workflows, which likely aren't really going to change that much. Many of them will, definitely. I think, for example, a lot of like Salesforce automation is very ripe for disruption. But I think the day-to-day is still pretty similar to what it was 18 months ago. I think there's a lot of opportunity to make it better and make it a lot more efficient for people, but ultimately RevOps folks are going to be, I think, tackling the same core things, essentially architecting systems and processes that make it very easy to deliver great reports moving into the next board meeting, right? That's like ultimately I think what it comes down to. So the tactics and the methods you use to deliver that outcome, might change a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's the same end goal.
Yeah, makes sense. One thing I'm curious about to get your perspective on is like, as you look at the things that Default is great at its core, and you think about doubling, tripling down on that core use case, and look at new technologies like AI and other things, and think about like, okay, how can we like take advantage of this, or can we take advantage of this new technology to sort of make our core use case even stronger? How do you think about the balance between that doubling and tripling down on your core use case and enhancing it with new technology like AI versus using this new technology to potentially expand into other use cases that you might not have been able to, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, et cetera? Like, how do you think about that balance?
Yeah, we're definitely thinking about both. So we're doing both very actively. I think the big like risk, I think, because for us, like we are built around and we're built and architected around incredibly deterministic workflows, right? Like, and that is like our superpower is we let you get super granular and as complex as you want or as simple as you want with how you build and run those workflows on our platform. Sprinkling AI into it doesn't make that better for the customer, because for us, like our customers, they want the ability to get super in the details.
Yeah.
And you can sort of imagine maybe another world where instead of our flagship kind of backbone of the product, which is our drag and drop workflow builder, right? It's just like a command line or something where you just like give it a prompt and you say, I want to reference like this territory, this AE, any account that has this user field that matches this Salesforce user ID. I want this to happen. That's not necessarily better. And it doesn't deliver, it's a lot less likely to deliver that super specific deterministic workflow outcome that the customer wants, right? That's why they buy us. So that being said, we're thinking a lot about how we can evolve, how we can actually make the current thing better, not necessarily with AI, but via abstraction. I do think AI is a really powerful thing for enabling abstraction of product complexity, especially in products that are very configuration heavy. But you can also say the same thing about like templates. A really good template library might be able to do the same as a command line for an AI kind of like workflow builder, right? But at the same time, we recognize that our core strengths and our superpowers are really, integration, complexity, the fact that we're not married to any single workflow, right? Like, yes, we are very, very good at inbound lead routing and, routing demos and meetings and accounts and whatnot. But, at the same time, we've invested pretty broadly in integrations and flexibility there. So you can also run like pretty complex Salesforce automations out of our product. Right. So you can do lead scoring, like all kinds of stuff. Right. So we are kind of like broadening our focus as well to make use of a lot of the foundation that we've laid in the product to move into tangential use cases.
Yeah, makes sense. Shifting gears a little bit to like some of the things you've observed with your customers or just generally go-to-market teams you've spoken to in the last, call it, year or so. I am curious, like, what you're seeing them do well in terms of how they're thinking about applying AI to enhance like their sellers' productivity or their RevOps team's productivity or whatever the case may be. And then like on the flip side, any sort of like clear red flags, things that you've either seen or that you would just warn go-to-market teams to sort of avoid, pitfalls to avoid. I'm curious for both sides of that based on how many both like what's unique about, I think what you're doing with Default is like, you're talking to a lot of RevOps teams on the back end. And I'm sure you're also talking to some of the, sellers on the front end who are going to be like managing those leads and things like that. So I'm curious, like what you're seeing on both sides of it.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a lot of noise. I'll say that. But I think some of the really interesting things we've seen have to do and revolve around using intent signals. A friend of mine, Conrad Millen at Rippling, great advisor to us, and he runs the growth ops team over at Rippling. Kind of recently told me about this concept of like dark TAM. Right? I think there's like been a really interesting trend recently over the last couple of years in terms of how people architect their like 0 to 1 go-to-market stack, where they go in, they hire kind of like an agency to come in and like maybe build out or map out their TAM in Clay, and then push all those accounts into Salesforce, right? And they sort of round robin the account ownership or assignments, et cetera. It's likely that a lot of the accounts that you should or could sell into are not in that initial TAM mapping, and they're sort of showing signals of potentially, buying your product or being in some very, very early phase of, either solution discovery or, problem awareness or something like that. They're just like not in your CRM, right? And I think if you make the mistake of adopting like a solely like mapped TAM only approach, you potentially lose out on a bunch of accounts that are coming to your website. They're looking at competitors, et cetera, and that obviously is not good if you're leaving potential revenue or growth on the table. So there's a really interesting orchestration a really interesting case to be made around like just being able to orchestrate these signals from the very top of your funnel from different sources to the right reps in the right territories, the right segments or teams or whatever, and sort of having a more holistic approach and not being solely focused on what is exactly in your CRM, because that may not be the source of truth for the sort of like maximum potential of what you can grow into in any given fiscal year. But mistakes wise, I've seen a bunch, and a lot of them have been a result of shoddy implementation of AI tooling. One I recently, as in like 2 hours ago, was chatting with the founder about was letting an AI SDR loose a little too early, right? And had a Clay agency, come in and kind of built everything out in their CRM and whatnot, and then they basically just let this AI SDR kind of blow up their TAM, and did not book very many meetings, and sort of there's now like a rebrand in motion. But yeah, it's a crazy story. But yeah, I think looking, especially for like earlier stage founders, I think like there's a lot of danger in automating away too much of the work that like sucks to do, but you should probably do. Like outbound is not just about, it's not about booking meetings in the 0 to 1 phase. It's about sort of like running a bunch of like micro positioning tests on your message with a certain ICP, and sort of building that gut feeling on what works with who, right, at what time, and why. So I think like just setting a system loose that is just hammering a bunch of people with the same kind of messaging, or like messaging you can't even control if it's just generating a bunch of copy for you, I think is pretty dangerous. And you sort of you even if you get it right and you skip to the end result of kind of booking the meeting, you don't build up that muscle of understanding what went into the message, why you wrote it that way, all the rationale that went behind it, right? So we might see systems evolve to do that, but I think there's something to be said about kind of putting your nose on the grindstone in the 0 to 1 phase and like just kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, I've been very anti AI SDR in general.
Yeah,
just
same.
because when I look at it, I see a bunch of channels that already are oversaturated. And if AI SDRs are successful, then all of the incentives become to only push more things through whatever channels it was successful with, which sort of leads to this like its own, like causing its own demise problem. But you raise another good point where in my last role before starting ChatAE, I was, the first sales hire and head of sales at an early stage, company in the going from, 0 to the first few million. And one of the things that since then I've done is advise several early stage founders on their 0 to 1 go to market motion. And you raise a good point. Part of doing that early outbound motion for a founder is building up that muscle. The other thing is I look at it from the perspective of that founding sales hire coming in. If you're an early stage company and you've done and you're a founder that is during the founder-led sales phase basically done outbound only via automation and only via like an AI SDR, then when you're bringing in that founding sales hire, there's really nothing you can transfer to them in terms of learnings. You can maybe, have some meetings in the hopper all ready to go, but that founding sales hire is going to have to relearn or learn for the first time all the things that founder should have learned in terms of what is working in terms of targeting, what is working in terms of messaging. And sure, an AI SDR could theoretically help you with that at scale, but when you're not, pouring over each word, pouring over each prospect one-to-one, really checking each prospect's LinkedIn individually to figure out, okay, like this title seems right, but like, are they actually focused on the right thing? And how does that title differ when they're in this industry versus this other industry? And what's misleading about it? All of those things are learnings that a founder should be able to transfer on to that founding sales hire. And you lose the ability to
That's
do
the secret
that
sauce.
if you're just automating that process.
Yeah, yeah. The thing we say internally is like you don't want to outsource your secret sauce to OpenAI. Because ultimately, like that not only is it super important to transfer that knowledge, that secret sauce, that tribal understanding of the early sales sauce to like your early sellers, your founding AE, your founding marketer, etc. But it also impacts a bunch of stuff outside of just the ability to book meetings, right? That conversion rate on like meeting sent to meeting booked. It also impacts your positioning, your messaging, your product marketing, your customer success, your implementation, like all of that, right? So yeah, I think it's really dangerous to sort of outsource your secret sauce to some LLM. So yeah.
In terms of looking ahead a little bit
Yeah.
to the rest of this year, honestly, I think a lot of us feel it. Like there's a lot of excitement with what 2025 could bring, particularly for what 2025 could bring in terms of AI investments and also just in general, a feeling of like a lot of the worst is behind us coming out of like that
Yeah.
2021, 2022 bubble and sort of this
Yeah.
recorrection that has happened. And I'm seeing like more teams accepting the new reality of like, you got to be more efficient. We're not just like doubling, tripling the sales team in order to hit this like next year's growth goal. We have to be more efficient. We have to, do more with not less, but do more with the same, maybe for longer. What are some of the things that, as you look ahead to 2025, are some of like the main predictions you have for either sales and go to market or AI or the intersection between?
Yeah, I am very optimistic about this year. I think into 2026. I think a lot of folks are. I mean, 2022 was rough, so for a lot of people. So I think a lot of people are feeling good. This past year was much better than 2023, which was much better than 2022. I think it's only gonna get better from here. But I think at the same time, I'm also like it's funny that like macro wise, everyone is feeling that optimism. And I think for a lot of like software vendors, I think there's a little bit of like existential, maybe angst or dread around AI kind of, potentially being the sort of like SaaS killer. I think, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft he just ran like the same Microsoft marketing playbook that they've been running since the 1980s of just spreading FUD about SaaS being dead, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think that there's a lot of software that is potentially going to get replaced, but ultimately, like AI SaaS I think exists because for like a number of reasons, but I think like one of the more important ones to think about in this like era and this face ripping like AI agent hype cycle that we're about to enter is the fact that a lot of people don't have the agency or the bandwidth to solve their own problems. And I think being really, really in tune with the solution, with the problems that your customers are facing, and this is like just goes deeper into the sort of anti SDR, anti learning from anti automating learning from your customers thing we were just talking about earlier. Like you got to be really in tune with what people are going through and like what problems they have and like what you can actually solve, right? And I think like the tighter your feedback loops between sales and marketing and product, the better. That is somewhere that I think everyone should invest. That's definitely somewhere like we're investing a lot of just making sure we have internally just an incredible frontline go to market org to the product team handoff, and we're just constantly thinking about that. We're iterating quickly and we're rethinking stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think AI agents are going to be really, really big this year. I think there's a lot of potential for everyone. I think that a lot of the existential dread and the sort of FUD that a lot of people have been parroting on LinkedIn and Twitter is misplaced. And that being said, if you fail to innovate, then you're, may not be in a great spot. But yeah, I'm generally feeling very good.
I saw a funny tweet yesterday, actually. It was like a quote tweet of someone else's. And the first tweet was like, something about like these AI companies or all these technology companies are pledging to invest $500 billion into into AI, and you're building an AI wrapper, and then someone quote tweeted it and was like, all of these technology companies are pledging to invest $500 billion into AI, and you're not building an AI wrapper. So it like cuts both ways, I think, where
it does
cut
both ways. Yeah.
Where it's like the investment can make products and workflows so much better. And you're still going to have like domain specific knowledge, domain specific applications that you're investing in and that you're building and that your customers need. And on the flip side, you know, as there is that existential dread a little bit from some folks. And so I thought that was like a great encapsulation of it, because it does cut both ways there.
It does cut both ways. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe like 2020, 2021 was the last time we saw many companies go from like 0 to 100 million of annual revenue in such a short amount of time. If you think about like Cursor and 11 Labs and a bunch of these other companies have gone from like 0 to 100 million in less than 2 years, right? It's very hard to kill commercial inertia like that. Like it's very rare that a company goes from 0 to 100 million in less than 2 years and then it just reverses, right? Especially if the teams are so small and they're just so lean and they're so efficient. Like what is the real downside case for that over like a 5-year time window, right? Like they will probably get to like 500 to 800 million of ARR in the next few years, right? If not a billion. Right. They're just incredibly fast growing. I don't think that $500 billion of AI infrastructure, a lot of which is, you know, given it's being footed by, you know, special interests is gonna, you know, necessarily go towards killing the SaaS economy. So I think there's a lot of upside for everybody.
Yeah. It's going to be a super fun year. No question.
Yeah, I'm pumped.
And
I'm pumped.
Want to thank you again, Nico, for joining us on this. This is super
totally
fun conversation.
Really enjoyed it.
We'll have to come back at the end of the year and figure out, or this time next year,
we'll do a recap.
How many of our predictions held up and how much of things evolved one way or the other. I think it's going to be really interesting as we especially as we settle into this year, see what unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited, very bullish for 2025. So
awesome. Well, how can people find you? How can people follow you? Any plugging you want to do? Any sort of upcoming product releases you want to break the news on here? Anything like that?
Yeah. Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm a little more serious on the former, but we will have some stuff I'm very, very excited about launching in a little over a month. So,
awesome.
Rebirthing the company, some might say. So, very, very excited for that.
Awesome. Well, Nico, thanks again. And like I said, we'll have to check back in a year from now, see how much our predictions held up. So appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
Let's do it. Thank you. You too.